So yeah, I'm just going to skim through briefly about who I am, and I've got different examples of my practice. It's been quite a busy year, so there's been like a lot of experimentation and yeah, sort of in reflection of this experience as well, because sort of when I saw this project on Instagram, I was just like, that's a dream. I want to do that in Wales. This is amazing. And yeah, I sent details about my work, and luckily I was invited. So yeah, that's really exciting. So I was born in Carmarthenshire in southwest Wales. I studied a foundation in Carmarthen School of Art. That was really fun. They sort of broke us down and built us back up again. And I didn't really realise I needed that. I was only 18. And yeah, that just really flipped my way of thinking. And then after that, I went on to study a degree in photography in the arts at Swansea College of Art. So I've been photographing since I was about 12. So I used, I think I mentioned to Julie earlier, basically I was growing into a teenager and I'm the oldest sibling. So I started getting a bit miserable with walks, family walks, because my friends were going to the cinema and shopping on weekends, and my family used to drag us up hills and to castles in the rain and things like that. And I was like, I don't want to be doing that. But I couldn't be left at home because I wasn't old enough, and they weren't gonna stop doing that just because I was getting miserable. So they basically gave me my granddad's camera, which I was like, oh, cool. And I started photographing images on the walks that we had as families. So that's how I got into photography. But I always enjoyed art and drawing and painting and everything in school. And I'm going to take a drink. I was doing my A-levels, and I was just doing absolutely everything. I was sewing, I was making plates and pots, I was painting, I was drawing. And my art teacher was just like, go do a foundation, because she just couldn't pinpoint what I was. And I had no idea what my medium was or what my discipline was. So yeah, it was during my foundation that I realized I could do a photography degree. I had no idea you could study that. It sounds really silly, but I was just not part of the creative community at all in any way. So once I found out, I was like, cool, and sort of put two and two together. So my photography work is extremely process-led. I sort of enjoy the process of image making and the tactical elements to photography as much as, probably more than the medium. And in terms of themes of my work, Carmarthenshire is quite important to me, that rural landscape, the areas that I went to as a kid that were relayed in stories that have been interesting stomping grounds. And I guess as I've become older, I've sort of questioned those landscapes and managed to decipher new meanings. So this image was sort of inspired by a mythical story, and it's an image of Cyd-fyw, which is the highest peak in Carmarthenshire, and there's a lake in the sort of ridge of the mountain. So this is following the river up through these frames, where I manipulated a film camera to overlay frames rather than take individual images. So it's like a panoramic but extended into different frames. And it was sort of a process that I learned out of an accident, but I kind of liked that I could drag the image through the walk rather than it just be a singular image. But the story about the place relates to a sheep farmer who finds a mythical lady in the lake, and he falls in love with her, and he manages to persuade her to come live with him in the village, and they have 2 sons. But there was some sort of rule. He couldn't strike her or more than 3 times, and there were different instances where he had striked her more than 3 times. and she disappeared back into the lake and she was never seen again. So I was quite interested in that mythical element of water and just how rainy Wales is. So yeah, there's a few images of that I also created, which were more singular, but just sort of trying to layer onto the frame within the images as well. So kind of using a camera how you shouldn't use a camera. I'm quite good at that. So yeah, another mini project. I'm going to skim through this briefly because I actually revisited this work recently, but it's a similar process in terms of manipulating the camera. And this was about a lake, which is right next to the house. So it's like my nearest lake, which during lockdown has become more important. But yeah, that was about the story of how the lake was formed, which Cyd-fyw, one of the Welsh princes, stopped there once and he was thirsty with his horse, and he found a well which was like covered up with a rock, and he uncovered the rock off the well and the water came out and he took a drink, and then I think he had enough to drink and he fell asleep, but he never put the stone back. And then when he woke up, apparently the lake was there. And then he used special magic and galloped around the perimeter of the lake to sort of secure it with his horse. So apparently that's why the lake was there. And I think these stories are just like really cute ones for me because they're my childhood, but I find it really bizarre when I go with friends to the lake and I mention the story and they just don't know because no one ever told them it. So I find that quite sad. So yeah, I've introduced text, but the images are sort of similar in a way. It's very focused on the water. And then throughout uni then, so those were more like independent projects whilst I was studying. And then I think for my sort of big graduating project, which is still sort of ongoing because I graduated in 2020, so it was disrupted halfway through and I kind of couldn't finish it, so I've just left it unfinished. But this, I wanted to think of Wales and its landscape in a wider form and somehow managed to connect it to water again. Water is a strong theme. And it basically, I was really interested in the idea of Welsh independence coming from an English family heritage. And I've never thought of Wales in a nationalistic way. But I was quite interested in what that meant, and it was a conversation that was happening more and more amongst friends and in social situations that were really casual, and I was just like, oh, what does this mean? And I kind of wanted to make a project about it, but I didn't know how to. So I started reading about Welsh independence and how it came about, why it's a thing, what is its history, how long has it been a thing for. And obviously I found a connection between water and the reservoirs in Wales that supply water to England. So that there's 3 reservoirs altogether, and cael and the twristiaeth is probably the most controversial, but there's also 2 other sites. So I began to be interested in like the landscape of reservoirs, basically. And realizing that they're like man-made things. So this work resulted in a combination of archival material, maps and different documents that I managed to find through family, because my family are from the West Midlands and they're like keen civil engineers. So the whole construction project, the details of building the reservoirs were like really fascinating to them. And my great granddad, who lived in Birmingham, when they built Elan Valley in mid Wales, he like deliberately moved house just so he could have Welsh water and not English water because it was healthier, and it drove so many communities out of poverty. So it was kind of, for me, it was interesting to see that perspective and how that benefited my family, but also how it's like not benefited the Welsh communities that I'm sort of interlinked with. So yeah, that little clipping was from the book that was my great-granddad's, and it's talking about Elan Valley and the gathering. The gathering grounds is basically where the water gathers in the ground, and obviously the yield is how much water they can take out, and it's Birmingham, the Corporation of Birmingham and their water committee. And in this book, it doesn't mention Wales once, but it describes the sole occupation of the population as sheep farmers. And I just felt like that's Wales. So I don't know, I just found that little characterization quite interesting. And I also began thinking about photographic material. I was photographing with Polaroids, and you can sort of cut Polaroids up and lift the emulsion off them in water. So I was photographing these reservoirs on Polaroid and then using the water from the reservoirs to lift the Polaroids up. And then I sort of started manipulating them into sort of creating water-based landscapes in a way. Is that okay?
I think so.
Yeah.
Can everyone still see? Can...
Yep.
Yeah? Great.
Cool. Yeah, and also began to collect rocks, but only ones that felt specific to the place, so some sort of form or pattern. And I also began to put the Polaroids onto the rocks. I don't know why, but I was sort of interested in this displacement of a material from a landscape that had also been displaced. So it felt like a process which was similar to the process of building these reservoirs. And I also photographed it in quite a classical landscape way as well whilst I was visiting. I carried many cameras and drove a long time to get to these different sites. Yeah, I didn't have a degree show. The work was picked up by Photo Gallery in Cardiff, so I had the work up there, which was quite fun, but it opened for 2 days and then we had another lockdown, or the galleries had to close, so that was a bummer, but we had a secret private view. So yeah, I saw the work, but this isn't necessarily how I would want to display my work, but it was just sort of what they offered. So yeah, I went with it, which was quite fun. And because I couldn't have a degree show, I decided to make a book. So I put the work into a book format, and I actually made 30 of them. And I sort of sold them to friends and people that I knew that really support my work and the project. So that was really lovely. I think I've got 2 left for me for safekeeping. So that was a fun process. And I guess since then, I've sort of been pushed back home to Carmarthenshire. I didn't really want to go back to Carmarthenshire, but I've sort of ended up there, and I've been interested in searching for elements from that gathering ground project into a more localised landscape. So my area is really well known for mining and coal. There's a lot of coal mining communities. But I realised that there's actually also a chain of limestone that goes diagonally through the county to the Brecon Beacons, and it's quarried really intensely. If you look on a map, you can literally see these dips along a diagonal line of quarries. And then once I realised where one was, there'd be one next to it and another one after that. So I started just exploring these quarries. There was also no one there, which is great because I hate being stopped by photographers when I'm photographing. So it was really good to avoid people. I quite like being by myself. Yeah, so as well as this is more me playing with the rocks and just sort of picking up and looking at them and selecting and placing them and sort of bringing what's on the ground onto the surface and things like that. Just I don't really know what the image means, but it was fun to take. And also collecting elements. I started noticing different levels of pollution in sites that are sort of, the quarries are all abandoned and they're sort of being reclaimed by nature. So I started using photographic paper to create weird little portraits of the compounds of the land. And I like the little textures that show up, and also the sort of dust that's left on the paper. Like, yeah, we found some weird dust in a cave today, and if I had a jar, I would probably gather that and take a sample. And also scanning, I've been using like a portable scanner, so that image on the right is actually rock, but I quite like that it looks like water and a waterfall. It's a really lo-fi technique, but it's quite fun. And yeah, I also tried to take, I bought some clay and plaster, so I tried to make casts of the rock because I fancied it, and sort of started to play with more sculptural elements with the prints and earth, and this is just on my little studio wall. And there's some more little prints of elements gathered from the sites. And then digital images as well. I'll try everything just to work out how I want something to look or appear. It's all kind of research for me. Yeah, and then there's some installation pieces there. So the water is actually from a quarry that's full of water. And then there's a lime kiln on the left, and then there's some moss from the quarry on the right. So it's quite a strange sort of sculptural, weird landscape, but not a landscape arrangement. And then, yeah, I'll probably skip through this quickly. But going back to the lake project, I also did quite a site responsive commission recently, which was purposely made to be virtual. And obviously it was all about space and young people's space and pandemic and things like that. So sort of my space became the lake by my house. That was my walk and stomping ground. Sort of it became like a regenerated space for play. And I've always wanted to hang things up in the woods, but I just thought the council would tell me off, and then I realised that I could just do it, photograph it, document it, and take it back down. So for the commission, I actually had a 360 camera, so I could photograph this space and create it virtually. I think there's like a preview of it there. And then I also embedded images that I'd taken, and it's sort of like a journey through the woods. I made some pieces with the bark, so that's the chain that's hanging in the middle that was shedding from the trees. I started making stuff with that, and yeah, it's a journey through my lake. So that was an interesting new way of envisioning work, especially when we've been so distant, and it's actually been really lovely to hear that people are getting lost in the woods from wherever through their phones, and that I created that. And yeah, so I'm sort of wrapping up to the end now. So I guess currently I'm like at the beginning of my journey. It's quite early. I'm beginning to freelance. I'm facilitating stuff, running workshops, photographing stuff, and yeah, making work. And I think I'm just really excited to be in such a beautiful landscape and meeting artists and hopefully collaborating and making some new work that can sort of be more of an outcome of all these different fragments I've been playing about with, really. And yeah, diolch am wrando, thank you for listening, and that's where you can find me if you need me. Yeah, thank you.